Now this figure is very, very important for you. This figure is very, very important. Every year, every economic survey will come up with a general inflation index, okay. So you can see that with a particular year it has been given, okay. This I have taken from the 1920 economic survey. So you can see that the different indexes been given, okay. Wholesale price index, where India's wholesale inflation is measured. Consumer price index combined, which is our this anger inflation indicator, okay, where RBI look into this inflation index only, consumer price index combined. Then we have consumer price index for particular category of people, like consumer price index for industrial worker, agricultural labor, rural labor, etc. So you can see in the year 2013, there have been high inflation, okay. So 2013-14 was high inflation, especially for consumer price index. But thereafter we can see, if you look into the consumer price index from 2014-15 onwards, okay, so there is a continuous decline. So till 2018-19, so there is a continuous decline. The exception being the year 1920, there have been an increase, okay. So from 2014-15 till 2018-19, there have been a consistent decrease. There have been a consistent decrease in the inflation index, okay. And one interesting thing to note down, okay, the last two financial year, okay, in the last two financial year, that is 2017-18 and 2018-19, the consumer price index combined, okay, which is our inflationary target, is way below the 4%. So this is for the first time this is happening, okay. Once RBI introduced this consumer price index new series, consumer price index combined series, okay. For consumer price index going below 4% for 2 consecutive years is very rare, and that important point you note down. That is one from this figure. That is one important point I want you to note down. Second important point to note down is that in the year 2015-16, wholesale price index was negative. What is negative inflation? Nothing but deflation, okay. So in the year 2015-16, wholesale price index went into deflation, not consumer price index, but wholesale price index or wholesale inflation. So these 2 points you keep in mind, okay. So they can ask you, say that, okay, the last 5 years in regarding wholesale inflation, there was no deflationary trend. That is wrong. In 2015-16 period, there was deflation for wholesale price index. And then they can say that from the year 2014-15 till the year 2018-19, there have been a continuous decline in consumer price index combined. That you can see that is also correct. If they take 1920, then there is a difference. 1920, there have been increase. Okay. But then they are saying that if in 2 financial year, consecutive financial year, consumer price index was below 4%, that is 2017-18 and 18-19, that is also correct. These information you keep in mind. The other information is not that important for you. Then another important point to note down regarding inflation is that, okay, these are the different important indexes, inflation indexes where we measure inflation. You need to know who releases these different types of indexes, because UPSC have already asked. And in every economic survey, this will be mentioned, okay. In every economic survey will mention who releases each index. For example, in the case of wholesale price index, okay, in the case of wholesale price index, Office of the Economic Advisor, Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade is, so wholesale price index is released by Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. There is an Office of Economic Advisor is there. So wholesale price index is released by the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. Consumer price index is released by National Statistics Office. Okay, so this is a new office created with the merger of CSO with NSSO. Okay, so National Statistics Office. Okay, national. So please note down. Okay, this is seen in the latest economic survey. Okay, so National Statistic Office releases consumer price index combined. Okay, So Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade Wholesale Price Index, National Statistical Office for Consumer Price Index combined, and the other three like Consumer Price Index, Industrial Worker, Agricultural Labor and Rural Labor, these three indexes are released by Labor Bureau and Labor Bureau for other three indexes. Now why I am giving importance is that because in the year 2015, UPSC have asked a question, and the question is this, that which of the following brings out the Consumer Price Index number for industrial worker. We know that Consumer Price Index number for industrial worker is released by the Labor Bureau. So your answer is C. So since already in 2015 UPSC have asked a question from this particular area, you are supposed to know who releases WPI, who releases Consumer Price Index combined, etc. Okay. Now, regarding Consumer Price Index, this is the most important index because the inflation is measured at the consumer level. Okay. Now, I already discussed regarding the concept of headline inflation and core inflation. The economic survey is also discussing. Headline inflation is the combined consumer price index where all the items are considered, and it is the main index which released every monthly by the National Statistical Office. Okay. Now, regarding the consumer price index, regarding the headline inflation, that is the major inflation, regarding headline inflation based on consumer price index, this headline inflation is on a declining path from 2014 onwards. We have seen from that particular figure, and the reason why there have been a decline in consumer price index is what they are saying is, the economic survey is saying is that it is because of the drastic fall in food inflation, the food inflation has fallen from, food inflation was 6.4% in the year 2014-15, and it has gone down to, in the year 2018-19, it went down to 0.1%. So one of the reason why the consumer price index have been in a steep decline till 2018-19 in the last 5 years is because of low food inflation. Okay, drastic fall in the food inflation. Okay. And the average consumer price index headline inflation declined to 3.4% in 2018-19. I told you for 2 consistent years it is low, and this is the low. 2018-19 consumer price index is the lowest index in this lowest rate once the consumer price index new series started releasing consumer price index. Okay, so you can also note down in the year 2017-18 and 18-19 for 2 consecutive years, 17-18, 18-19, the consumer price index combined was below 4%. I told you to note down this important point. Okay, and the decline in the inflation especially in the year 2018-19 was mainly due to low food inflation, because low food inflation was very low during that period. It went in food inflation was in the range of minus 2.6 to 3.1%. So this is regarding consumer price index headline inflation. Okay. Then considering the core inflation. Okay. The economic survey 2018-19. Okay. Economic survey not 19-20, 18-19 have discussed more about the concept of core inflation. Generally, economic survey don't discuss the concepts, but in the 18-19 economic survey have discussed especially regarding the concept of core inflation. So there's a chance that UPSC may ask a question regarding the concept of core inflation. We will see that what the economic survey have discussed regarding core inflation. Regarding core inflation, economic survey says that core inflation correspond to that component of inflation that is likely to continue for a long period. Okay. So core inflation is that component of inflation where that inflation will continue so the inflation will continue, that range will continue for a longer period. And so since the core inflation will continue for a longer period, core inflation captures the underlying trend. Core inflation captures the underlying trend of inflation, and core inflation is considered to be more stable compared to the headline inflation. Okay. So in the case of core inflation, okay, core inflation is not affected by temporary shocks. We know that in the case of fuel and food items, based on seasonal factors, in the case of food items, and based on the international oil prices, fuel items prices continuously changes, okay, in a drastic way. So, but these changes are not affecting core inflation because they are not considered in the core inflation, okay. So, core inflation shows what will be the underlying inflation and it is considered more stable. Reason being, in the case of core inflation, these volatile items in the headline inflation will be removed in the case of core inflation. That's the most important point you note down, okay. In the case of India, high volatile components are excluded from the headline inflation to get core inflation. So in India, the most volatile items are food and fuel. So core inflation is calculated after removing the food and fuel components from the headline inflation, okay. So since headline inflation exhibits volatility due to these shocks created by food and fuel, most of the central banks focus on core inflation because that will give a stable inflation outlook. And regarding the consumer price index based on core inflation, in the case of India, consumer price index based on core inflation have remained above 4% since the new series have started being introduced, okay. So we already told you consumer price index headline inflation in the year 1718 and 1819 was well below 4%, but the consumer price index combined core inflation have been always above 4% once this new series was launched, okay. So that is a very important point to note down. Core inflation was always above 4% after the new series of consumer price index was launched, okay. So in the case of consumer price index core inflation even increased in the financial year 2018 to 5.8% from the earlier 4.6%. This is not important, just this is what economic survey covered, okay. So a new concept was discussed in the economic survey other than the core inflation, okay. This is not there in the 1920 economic survey. A concept what is called as refined core inflation. So core inflation and refined core inflation is discussed in the economic survey 1890, okay. So what refined core inflation according to the survey is, refined core inflation is equals to consumer price index excluding food and fuel group, okay. Food and fuel group will be excluded along with petrol and diesel. So in the refined core inflation, after excluding food and fuel group, it is also excluding petrol and diesel. So this is what is refined core inflation, and refined core inflation have always moved closely with core inflation, okay. So just have an idea, okay, what is this refined core inflation, okay. CPI excluding food and fuel group plus petrol and diesel, okay, have been added to get refined core inflation, okay. So these things is discussed in the 1890 economic survey. So I am discussing it here. So in case if a question comes, what is core inflation, what is the trend of core inflation, you can easily answer it. So you have to know the definition of core inflation, and always keep in mind after this new consumer price index series were launched, the core inflation, consumer price index, combined core inflation have remained above 4%. Okay, so just for your knowledge, not that important, but you have to see the movement of consumer price index, combined headline inflation, core inflation and food inflation. This dark black color is headline inflation, this green color is food inflation, and this orange color is core inflation. So you can see that in the earlier period, it is given from February 2012 to 2019 period. When consumer price index headline inflation was very high, the reason for this consumer price index high inflation was food inflation. So that time core inflation, if you see that comparatively core inflation remained to be more stable, more steady. See this period of core inflation, it used to be remain steady. Okay, so the trend started changing. Okay, if you notice one thing, again I told you nearly till August 2019, the food inflation remained to be at lower level, but things started changing after that. So food inflation from October 2019 onwards started increasing. So that is the reason for increase in the headline inflation. Okay. So, and see that who releases this data? NSO, National Statistical Office. Just for your understanding. Okay. So comparatively, in comparing this food inflation, core inflation and headline inflation, the most stable one is core inflation. Now, this figure is very, very important. Okay, the facts is not important for us. Okay, the facts is not important for us, but the trend is important for us. Okay, the trend is important for us. Okay, every economic survey related with an inflation chapter will have a table like this. Okay, so note down the latest consumer price index combined series is the base year is 2012. Okay, so please note down the consumer price index combined base year is 2012. Consumer price index combined base year is 2012, not a financial year, but 2012, that is January to December 2012 is the base year. Now, if you look into the consumer price index, if you look from this, in the consumer price index, okay, see, different weightage is shown here, okay. Here, this C consumer price index, okay, food price index, okay, this consumer food price index, CFPI, consumer food price index is given a weightage of 39.1%, okay. This is actually, the food inflation is measured through. The food inflation is measured through this consumer food price index, okay. So, if you look into the food inflation, which is measured through consumer food price index, you can see that in the financial year 2017-18, it was 1.80. In 18-19, food inflation was at 0.1%. Okay, 0.1%. Okay, and in 1920, the trend started differentiating regarding food inflation. Okay, especially from the month September onwards, you can see an increasing trend. And in December, it even food inflation reached 14%. This is the data available in the economic survey. Okay, so food inflation have been high in the last 2 quarters of 1920. Sorry, this is the important point. But if you look into the beverages also is been added, it will be having a weightage of 45.9. Okay. Now, if you look into the various food products, which one is having, okay, cereals and products is having a higher weightage in the food items, 9.7%. Meat and fish is having a weightage of 3.6%. Okay, milk products is having a weightage of 6.6%. Just for your idea, these are the weightage being given. And in the consumer price index combined, fuel and light is having a lower weightage. Okay, compared to wholesale price index. In wholesale price index, fuel is given higher weightage, but in consumer price index, fuel and light is given a lower weightage. Now, this is core inflation. Consumer price index excluding food and fuel group is core inflation. In core inflation, the weightage is coming around 47.3. Now, if you look into the consumer price, I told you even in the lowest 17-18 and 18-19 where consumer price index combined was lower, when consumer price index combined was lower, the core inflation was above 4%. All these points you keep in mind, okay. Now, one important point regarding December, I told you in December 2019, the food inflation, just that month the food inflation was 14%. The reason for high food inflation in December 2019 is because of vegetables, okay. Vegetables, which is having a weightage of 6%, rose to 60% in December 2019, okay. So this information is conveyed in the economic survey, you just note down it. But again, I told you the trend is more important for us rather than the fact, okay. So one important point you need to note regarding consumer price index and wholesale price index is that, okay, consumer price index measures inflation at the consumer level. Wholesale price index measures inflation at the wholesale level. But in the consumer price index, food items is given higher weightage compared to wholesale price index. That's the reason why whenever food inflation is high, consumer price index increases compared to the wholesale price index increase will not be that high because the weightage for food items in the wholesale price index is comparatively lower. So this information also you keep in mind. Okay.